Right, guys, welcome back to the solo podcast number 2. So this is going out a little bit later than originally I wanted to get it out. Just been a mad busy couple of weeks with obviously just lots of stuff going on. I'm obviously in the third week of my mini cut, which is going well now. I had a bit of a blip last week in regards to things like stress and sleep being really, really poor, which led to my weigh-ins just staying at kind of where they didn't want to be. But now, obviously, with a de-stress week, work life just returning back to normal, I've seen weight drop by 3 pounds already this week, which is just crazy when you consider how much stress has an impact on what your physique looks like and things like holding water retention as well. So for anyone that is dieting, try and put yourself in the most less stressed environment as possible so you can have those successful weigh-ins, like successful physique changes, and just basically for an easier look on your data. But that's why it's important to obviously look at things like the data, look at other things like external variables before making changes to your nutrition, to your training. You'll see it with a lot of people. They just have a week where they do not move with their weigh-ins, but they then just slam loads of cardio in, slam loads of nutrition changes, when potentially it just could be another variable which needs to be controlled. So something like sleep, something like stress, even things like sodium levels as well. So many different things. So got a fair few questions to get through for the solo podcast, which is cool that people are still sending in questions to ask. So I'll get through these and we'll just kick off with the first one from Janine. She's asking, when you first started prep, did you feel fat? I wouldn't say I felt fat. I guess I just probably felt fluffy in a way. It's difficult for me to kind of feel fat, because when it comes to my off season, I really enjoy that physique as much as I enjoy my prep physique. So I never really feel too far gone in terms of being too fat. Admittedly, when I actually do start to then look back at the pictures and look back at how I actually look like, I probably was too heavy. And this is something that I've done with a lot of my athletes this year, is starting them off in a better place. So utilizing things like the pre-prep phase to actually be starting prep in a position where you've only got 20 pounds to lose and you don't have to lose 40 pounds all in one go. But the thing to realize is technically the pre-prep phase is still prep at the end of the day. It's still in a deficit, but it gets rid of that large initial chunk of fat loss. So you've got a real clear idea of what your physique actually tends to look like. Whereas when you start a bit heavier, it's always hard to really actually tell how much you have to lose. Because I'll be honest, when I first started prep in 2018, I looked at my physique and thought, I'm probably about 30 pounds away from stage. But in reality, I was actually 41 pounds from being my leanest. And that was lean with glutes in. So always look at your physique, and then once you've kind of guessed how much weight you've got to lose, always add another 5 or 10 pounds, because there's always more to lose. I even shocked myself this year. I turned up at the qualifiers and I was 160, and I then turned up at the finals at 152. So there was 8 pounds between my qualifier to the final, where I had much more weight to lose. And funny enough, things like glutes came in, things like the lower back came in. So it's just, don't underestimate kind of how much you've got to lose. But I've kind of gone off the question now about feeling fat, but just obviously look at your physique. Maybe we can get someone else to analyze it to really kind of give you a good idea of where you're at. Right, so Fly French has asked, have you ever dealt with a client out of the normal range in their volume landmark? For sure. I mean, I've had clients who have come to me, I've looked at their programming and thought, what the hell? You're doing 30 sets on back and 30 sets on chest within 2 days of training. And it's just when someone's doing that many sets in their training, there's two things which aren't right. First of all, their intensity. If someone's managing to do that many sets across a training week, they're probably not training as hard as they could be. And that's always a reality. So I always ask for training videos. It's the first thing I ask for with any new client that comes on. It's so important to see videos from people lifting, because you can actually see someone's intensity then. And the second thing I actually look at is actually kind of how the movement lifts, their actual form and everything. because again, making sure that form is there, they're actually going through the whole range of motion for the movement. All of these things, along with the intensity, gives me a good idea of seeing like where their actual volume landmark is. And you'll find that a lot of people are just doing junk volume. In my opinion, like junk volume, when you get towards those kind of sets which are really high per week, you're probably just forcing more kind of pointless sets than needed, ones which aren't really progressing, you're just chasing a pump with them. So yeah, I've certainly seen clients obviously with out of that normal volume landmark, and I'll usually bring them back in. We'll usually focus on the intensity of the lift, and they'll usually progress much faster because they're not doing as many working sets, but their intensity is higher and they can actually up more load instead of just doing sets on sets on sets where load usually starts to decrease throughout. We can actually focus on 3 or 4 high quality sets as opposed to like 6 or 7, which are just kind of basically getting the volume up for the sake of it. Volume is great, but intensity needs to be there as well. So that's always the first thing I would look at if you feel like your volume is too high. Okay. So Dan has asked, what is your view on the 2 sets per exercise method, 8 to 12 load sets, then 12 to 15 like JP does? So I'm a big fan of it. I do use it in my training and clients training often as well. The only thing with that is if you're doing those sets which are to failure and obviously like on those heavy top sets, you can't do loads and loads of sets on it. So you can probably do like 2 or 3 sets max. For things like top sets and down sets, because the intensity is so high, the volume needs to be lower. All right, and that's one of the big things you need to realize. If intensity is high, you're going to failure on all of your lifts. Your volume needs to be low to match that intensity, because you can't have intensity here and volume here, because you would just end up getting injured. You'll get tired really quickly. You will just fatigue an incredible amount. So it needs to be like a perfect balance of them. And I really like the idea of the back off set at a higher rep range to increase the volume that we're looking to achieve across a session. So I'm a real big fan of it. Don't just kind of disregard straight sets, because they are the real kind of, I guess, the meat and potatoes work for me. Straight sets will always be kind of one of the things I'll really focus on within a mesocycle. But I do enjoy top sets and down sets because it gives you the element of excitement when you go in and you crush a top set. You know that your mind is on that first set that is coming, like whether you've got a top set of like 4 to 8 reps, you know you're going in and that is your primary goal to absolutely crush that. And hopefully you can. And then obviously your down sets, they're there. You still want to obviously go just as intense, but they're obviously have a higher rep range to really make up that volume. So it adds excitement. It really does add that enjoyment to a program, instead of following like kind of, I guess, straight sets for kind of 4 or 5 sets where potentially boredom can take over. And if you're someone that wants enjoyment from a program, but to still progress, things like top sets and down sets will work really, really well for you. Right, so next question is from Tyler Walters. So how many cals do you look to drop for a mini cut? How much cardio would you implement and what? So I'll start with the calories first. So obviously the first thing I do before I actually enter a mini cut is go to a deload week. Obviously it's probably the best thing for you to do before you start a training block, because the mini cut is effectively a new training block. So I'd look at starting a deload week, and then I would bring the calories back down to maintenance so we can actually drop the initial water from the mini cut. The first week of the mini cut, you'll think, oh, I've dropped 6 pounds in fat, but the reality is that's just 6 pounds in water and glycogen. So the first thing you do is bring calories to maintenance. That way we can drop the water, drop some glycogen in the first week, and then the weeks after, predominantly will obviously be mainly fat loss with a bit of water and glycogen as well. So I'll bring calories to maintenance, then I will drop off a deficit of around about 20%. Mini cut needs to be aggressive. This is so important to understand. The mini cut needs to be aggressive. If you're doing the mini cut and you're not in a big deficit, you will turn your mini cut into just a normal cut. Right now, I'm in quite an aggressive deficit. I'm in probably a deficit of around about, I would say, 20% at the minute. And the weight is flying off. Training is still good, but I'm noticing now a little bit more fatigue in the gym. But the thing is, like I said, it is in and out. The mini cut is designed to prolong your gaining phases. That is what they are there to do. They're not there to get shredded. They're not there to get beach lean. They are there to prolong your gaining phases. And they should be used, I think, periodically for more people. I don't think enough people do them. They just get too overweight. And that's something I probably did wrong in my last off season. That's something I'm going to correct and do more of, to stay leaner, push up, stay leaner, push up, and actually push up when and actually look better at certain body weights instead of just focusing on just gaining weight for the sake of it. So that's what I would do in terms of obviously my calories. I'd be looking to drop. And then in terms of your cardio that I would implement, I wouldn't do any at the first point. I honestly don't think there's any need. I think it depends what you're already doing in an off season, okay? So if you're doing 10,000 steps a day in your off season, maybe increase that to 12 or 13. If you're doing potentially a couple Stairmaster sessions already in your off season, then just keep them in. You can create a mini cut deficit from your calories. You don't need to create it from anything else, in my opinion. The thing you want to obviously make sure is a priority in your mini cut is your training. So you don't want to have anything that is going to detriment your training, things like cardio or just doing loads of steps. So personally, I always opt for calories. I think that's the easiest thing to manipulate. You can manage that for 6 weeks pretty easily. As long as you obviously choose the right foods and everything, you should be fine. So I wouldn't implement any cardio unless necessary. So it really depends on the person, the client, how many calories I feel they need to be on, whether extra cardio will help with giving them more food. So it's really kind of person dependent. Right, so Tom Mantle has asked what to do in a deficit if food focus is high but fat loss is still required. So bit of tough love here, Tom. Just crack on, mate. Just crack on, and I guess suck it up at the end of the day. Food focus will be high in a deficit. You've got to remember what a deficit is. It is a controlled starvation of your body. So reality is your food focus is going to be high. I spent 4 months last year thinking about food all the time, but the goal was more kind of something that I wanted to tick off rather than dealing with food focus. Food focus is just what it is. It's just part of a deficit. You can get away from it. You can obviously utilize things like diet sodas, diet drinks, like sugar-free sauces. You can utilize obviously things like intermittent fasting as well to help with obviously not feeding yourself until hungry. Lots of volume through veg and salad. You've obviously seen last year. That's what I did a lot of. But even most meals just won't really fill you up. And that's just part of it. When you get to lower body fat levels, you'll probably find that you just will never really get fully full from the meals you're having. I think you've just got to embrace it. You've got to embrace being hungry and kind of accept that it's part of the process and almost use it in a way of actually knowing that you're still in a deficit. It sounds very sadistic and kind of, I guess, quite sad in a way. But for me, I quite like being hungry in a deficit because it means that the deficit is working. Like if I'm hungry, it usually means that I'm on the right amount of food for me to drop body fat. So I think with food focus, you've just got to potentially look at your meals out the day. All right. So instead of just sucking it up, look at your meals, see where you could potentially swap some things around. If you're having eggs, swap it for egg whites. If you're having oats with milk, swap it for oats with water. Look where you can save calories within your day so it's not going to be too detrimental to your food focus. But on the other hand, just understand food focus is part of it and just crack on with it and just accept it's there. If your fat loss is still required, you've still got a job to do. Maybe you could look at upping steps, upping your cardio to save having to take away more food from your current amount. All right. Food focus is one of those things which is always going to be there. I spent probably a good 6 weeks on about 1,700 calories last year, but the end goal was sweeter than spending 6 weeks on 1,700 calories. Like now I've got what I wanted. Like I don't really care about that. That's done. But it's just how bad do you want to get to where you want to get to, and can you actually require going that low with food if you need to, or even with expenditure. Okay. So, Mackinod, do you like to see reps the same across all sets of an exercise with the last set taken closer to failure? So, good question. I like to see reps go up in a linear fashion. What I tend to do with a lot of my clients is set a rep goal of, let's just say like 6 to 8 or 8 to 10. That way you can work within a weight for that rep range. So for example, let's say you've got a bench press at 8 to 10 reps. This is just obviously off the cuff. And you can work at 100 kilos for a set of 10, 10, 10, all right? The next week you can go up by 2.5 kilos if form and execution was good. If you hit 999, you would then try the next week to get 10, 10, 10 at the same load. So I think your loading should only go up when your rep ranges hit the top of your rep markers. And when you've hit that comfortably over potentially 1 week or 2 weeks, then the load can then go up. So I think that's the best way to do things, I personally feel, across all of those sets. And in terms of taking things closer to failure on the last set, this is going to be mainly dominated by the type of exercise you're doing. So if you're going to do a flat bench press and take your last set to failure, but your next working exercise is a dumbbell shoulder press, taking that last set to failure probably isn't a good idea, because you're going to get a lot of front delt fatigue. And when you actually come to do your dumbbell shoulder press, you're probably going to then be like not really progressing that as well as you could have done if you potentially just stayed within your rep goal. But on the other hand, on things like a dumbbell lateral raise, an upright row, maybe like a lat pull down, and then you're going to be following that movement with maybe some curls or tricep movement, taking that last rep closer to failure is probably okay, all right? So I think it's picking and choosing when to take your sets to failure, and I think that's what the bulk of it is realistically, is going to take this set to failure then going to set me up well for my next working exercise? And if it's probably not, and you look at it in a way that it is going to potentially detriment the next sets of exercises, then I would just leave a couple reps left in the tank. That's my personal opinion. I know a few people would disagree with that, but obviously everyone's entitled to their own opinion on that side of things. So another question from Macdonald as well. I get quite sore from 2 to 3 days from 2 sets of RDLs consistently for the last few months. Should I avoid this? So I think you should probably look at your form first. It depends where you're getting sore, okay? I think this is a big thing as well. It depends where you're getting sore in certain areas. Like if you're getting sore in your lower back for 2 or 3 days, it may not just be the RDLs. It could be something totally different. It could be your lower back loading from different movements that you're doing, like barbell rows, deadlifts, RDLs, good mornings, like so many different factors which could influence that. But the first thing I would look at is your form on an RDL. If it's good, potentially look at the volume you're then doing for things like your hamstrings and your glutes. And if it is potentially quite high and the soreness is kind of come from other movements, then I would then potentially just back off on those movements and obviously keep the RDLs in. But yeah, soreness is not a bad thing. I think a lot of people think soreness is soreness you shouldn't have it. But I think the soreness is a good indicator, if you're feeling it in the right muscle groups, that you've actually hit them well, okay? And to be honest, mate, you potentially could actually not need that much hamstring volume. So if you're getting sore off of 2 sets of RDLs, you may just, like, a lot of people I know have got a lot of clients that only need like a few sets of quads in their workouts a week and they're done. And that's them done in terms of their training for their quads. So I think you just potentially may respond really well to kind of that lower volume hamstring training. Depends how heavy you're loading these RDL sets as well. There's so many different reasons behind it. What I would potentially do as well is just make sure your next leg day is positioned away from when you do RDLs. So if you're going to do RDLs, let's say on a Monday after a set of squats or something, then you could then potentially do RDLs or your next leg day like on the Thursday. So give yourself enough rest time between those days if you carry a lot of soreness in between. Right, so the next question from Stephen Hunt is asking again about mini cuts. Very popular topic, as obviously I think summer is coming. Everyone wants to try and get a tiny bit leaner. So he asks, any advice on mini cut duration and pounds lost, weighing 84 kilos at the moment and around about 20% body fat. So again, like it comes back to the earlier question from about kind of how much calories we're obviously looking to drop by. The length of the mini cut shouldn't really be any longer than 8 weeks. Okay, if it's any longer, it's basically just a normal cut. I like to fall between 4 and 8 weeks, and I like to go for 6 as my middle ground, because I just think any more you're kind of running into potential fatigue with training, because obviously the mini cut is so harsh, training does start to suck. So in terms of like pounds lost, again, this is going to differ for a lot of people, But just to give some context, I've just had 2 clients go through a mini cut. One was actual for a proper mini cut and one was for a pre-prep phase, who is now in a maintenance block to kind of get rid of any diet fatigue. One of them lost 14 pounds and then the other lost, I think it was 12. So it gives you a good idea, I think, of a good amount you can lose within a 6-week gap. I would aim for around about £2 a week over 6 weeks, and you're looking at somewhere around about 12 to 14 pounds within that time. And this again depends on the severity of the deficit and how long you're going to do it for. If you wanted to lose more than a stone or more than 14 pounds, you just extend the mini cut out, or you would increase the amount of deficit that you're going to be in. But obviously just be a bit cautious on how much of a deficit you go into, that training doesn't start to suffer. I would sort of almost see your first sign of training suffering and potentially dropping load on lifts as potentially time to then pull the mini cut, depending on obviously length and how far into it you and variables as well. But yeah, I think if you're 84 kilos, you could probably drop to somewhere around about 78 in about 6 weeks, if the deficit was enough and your calories were nice and high right now. But under 80 kilos is probably a good marker to go for. And you probably notice a lot of difference with that as well. So yeah, that's what I would go for, in my opinion. So hopefully that helps, Stephen. Next question is from T Noble 1992. He's asked, I've been training for 3 years, but little structure to my program. Would you recommend push-pull legs? So it depends what you're doing now. I hate the answer, it depends, because I can never really give full context to actually what you're asking, but it really depends on what your training split is like now. Is it progressing? Have you really utilized that split over a period of time before kind of calling it? A lot of people would just train like certain splits, like full body, upper lower, and then not really kind of rinse that split for what it is before moving to something like a push-pull legs. The thing that alarms me most about your question is you said with little structure, okay? So if your structure is poor on your current training program, the first thing you should be doing is making that structure good. That's the first thing you should be doing. You shouldn't be looking at doing another program right now. You should be trying to find your structure with your current program that you're actually on. And then from there, once you've kind of rinsed and repeated that a little bit, then potentially look at maybe adding another training day in. And then if you've got room to then add another training day, then you can. So you don't have to go from sort of upper lowers to push-pull legs. You can go from upper lower to push-pull legs, rest, upper lower, so 5 training days. And then obviously your last kind of protocol would be a push-pull leg split. So there's so many different variables that you could choose to do within that. But it really depends on what your current structure is like. Is your routine at the minute progressive? Because that's the first thing you should really make sure with any routine is that you're progressing in it. If you're not, and there's something which needs to be switched up, then find that reasoning. Is there not enough rest days? Have you got enough days to train in the week? Can you split your volume up over those programs that you need over the days of your training? And then find that. And if it's not, then you could obviously look to other splits if needed. Okay, so hopefully that helps. But I would definitely just look at your split right now and find where you can add structure in. If you're not tracking your sets, if you're not tracking your weight or reps, that's the first thing I would be doing before even thinking about messing around with any kind of splits. All right. So next question comes in from Reese. He asked, what is the ideal pre-workout meal in a cutting phase, as it is something I've been lacking personally and just fitting into training now? And what is the optimum time to have it before your workout? So the ideal pre-workout meal in a cutting and diet phase, I say this to everyone, because it really shouldn't be, I don't think it should be too advanced and too technical. Obviously, this is going to be dependent on your life. Like if you're someone like me who is sitting at home and has time to plan my pre-workout meal and plan exactly the time I get to the gym, it's fine because it's very optimal for me. But if it's someone who's working out on the road or potentially even just busy in an office job, doesn't really have time to eat, the perfect pre-workout meal is going to differ for everyone. So I think the main thing you need to have in place is a meal that is going to set you up and satiate you for your training session and to make you feel good when you train. That's the most important thing. Not the specific amount of carbs you're getting in, not the specific amount of protein, specific amount of fats. Enough food, good quality food, which is going to make you energized when you train and actually feel good when you train, so you're not hungry mid-session. Okay, so that's the first important thing. In terms of like macro splits when you train for pre-workout, your pre-workout meal probably isn't going to be the meal that's going to be really digested in time, ready for training. It's going to be the meals pre-workout meal, so like breakfast and lunch or whatever time you train. But in terms of the macro splits I'd get in, it depends like when you last had a protein serving. I think just getting a protein serving in before you train is always going to be a good idea anyway, because the likelihood is you're probably then not going to then eat for another 3 to 4 hours. And obviously you want to try and spike muscle protein synthesis throughout the day. So if we can have that 3 to 5 hour gap where we are doing it, if you say train at 2 p.m, you would have your pre-workout meal at, let's say, 12:30 p.m. You'd have a protein serving with your obviously carbs, probably minimal fat as well, because you want to obviously try and digest those carbs. And then throughout, obviously, you're training, you're going to train, and then you're going to get home maybe, 4 o'clock, and then it's probably time for another protein serving. So just for the sake of argument, I would try and get a protein serving, good quality in, with a easily digestible carb source and minimal fats. That's what I would go for personally for a pre-workout meal. And then post-workout, it's just, my post-workout is usually my dinner. I don't really have like a specific post-workout meal, because I usually get home at about 5 o'clock. I've usually eaten at somewhere around about 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And then I've got like a 3 to 5 hour window where then I'll probably eat protein again at like 6 or 7 o'clock. So I'm not like smashing in a massive post-workout meal straight after the gym. I usually just let myself get home, just chill out a little bit, and then have some food. So again, this is going to really depend on your lifestyle, what you can actually do in terms of getting food in. So again, it depends. I hate that answer, but it really does. So yeah, there is no perfect pre-workout meal, but if I was to choose something I would definitely have, it would be a protein source and a carb source, just so I can feel energized and satiated when training. In terms of the optimum time to have it before your workout, I would always opt for sort of an hour at a minimum. I find that if I eat too early before training, it's just on my stomach and it doesn't really feel good. So I tend to use an hour to maybe an hour and a half. That's usually a good amount of time for a pre-workout meal for me to let it digest before I actually then go and train. So yeah, I would say about an hour to an hour and a half is a good amount of time to really feel good. So that was the last question from Reese. So thank you for that, buddy. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed that podcast. Like I said, trying to get these out weekly, so we'll look to put up another Q&A on Saturday or Sunday, ready for a next bunch of questions. So yeah, happy to answer any questions you've got, guys. In terms of myself now, I've got obviously next week on the mini cut, which is week 4, week 5, week 6, hopefully going to be done by then. The goal is to get to like the 170s and just stay there for about 4 weeks. As if any of you follow me on Instagram, the reason behind obviously wanting to stay at that body weight is because it's where I feel good in terms of wearing clothing and everything. And because my wedding is in 8 weeks' time, that's why I've got to then try and maintain that 170-pound weigh-in. Because I do feel good around that, like in terms of my physique, my like abdominals start to show a little bit more. I don't feel puffy in the face. I've certainly started to notice that go down a little bit more now as well. So yeah, I mean, the mini cut so far in terms of food, it's been a breeze. Like I eat my first meal at 12. Next meal is probably at about, 3 o'clock. And it's just very, very easy in terms of a hunger perspective to do it. I think because I've just spent so long last year being able to stay away from lots and lots of food because I wasn't able to eat it, that just doing this just seems really easy. And I think the food types you pick, as long as you pick the right ones, it's gonna be easy to execute. If you're picking high volume proteins, high volume carbohydrates, not wasting your mini cut macros on stupid junk food, then you'll be fine. Like most of my meals are very clean bro foods because they're filling. I'll still have a little bit of if it fits your macros, but majority of my day is just very filling foods. Which is going to set me up well. So yeah, mini cuts are easy if you can execute them well, and you've got a low stress environment in your life. If you've not got a low stress environment, probably a mini cut's not a good idea. And I've seen that a lot with a lot of clients, especially like with female clients as well. Things like mini cuts with the high stress environment just doesn't work well. So yeah, when you do a mini cut, just make sure you're ready for it. That's the main thing. So any questions, guys, obviously pop them in the comments below. If you've got any questions that you want to ask for the next podcast, please just pop them either on the YouTube channel, on the comments, or even just in my direct message. So yeah, Jaguar Fitness on Instagram, or even just my email, which will be in the link for the YouTube description. All right, guys, so hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.